Also want to welcome all of you here into the Poetry Room. I'm Peter Maravelis. I host the events here at City Lights. And for those of you online, very important to note that we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, also known as the San Francisco Bay Area. Numerous dialects of their languages were spoken along this peninsula. Wanted to take a moment and sort of acknowledge those who came before us as stewards of the land. So, Gloria, it's great to have you back to City Lights. You know, it has been many, many moons. City Lights published a wonderful collection many, many years ago, and it's been that long, I think. So I think we may have done something virtually.
1999, which I don't think there were anything virtual except for corporations. But I think I read somewhere in between that time when the last book was published. It's a book of stories, actually. A lot of them located más o menos in Berkeley. But about the sort of Berkeley generation and ethic. But yes, thank you for remembering and for dragging out these nice, clean copies.
And they're still in print, I'm happy to say. But tonight we are celebrating Lies and More Lies, which is published by a wonderful indie, up-and-coming indie publisher called BlazeVox Books. And of course, for those of you online who might not know, Gloria is, of course, a poet, a prose writer. She's the author of the books How Proust Ruined My Life and Other Essays, which is also a BlazeVox book. Also, The True Patriot, which is a Spoiton Devil book. And also a collection of poems, Homeless at Home, which was the winner of the American Book Award. So Distance is No Object is the book that Gloria was making reference to, which City Lights published, which, of course, we have on hand tonight. And also, it's the author of How I Learned. So she is Professor Emerita of Writing and Literature at California College of the Arts, makes her home in Berkeley, and of course, such a delight to have you here now, celebrating this new book.
Thank you, Peter.
So this is a very compelling, very lovely collection of short prose that really reaches you deep down inside in some very interesting ways. I found myself having to reread, and then also at times it was raising the hair on the back of my neck.
Good, good.
I think you really succeeded, in hitting some nerves there, and I was hoping that maybe we would begin with you reading an excerpt, reading a piece, and I was thinking of the piece in particular because we're here at City Lights. And the piece that I was thinking of is War is a Lie. And the reason I thought of that piece is because I don't know how many people know that, Lawrence Ferlinghetti was actually a naval commander in World War II. This is one of the lesser known things about him. And this really helped shape his pacifism. He was in Normandy as a navigator on a troop carrier. He saw the first few waves of soldiers hit the beach. They were all mowed down. He took photographs of that. Those are now in the Smithsonian. They're part of the public record. After that, he was sent to the Pacific Theater, where he was also on a troop carrier. They were on their way to Tokyo. And then suddenly they were told the war was over. And everyone was perplexed. They had absolutely no idea how this could be so. No one, of course, heard of the atomic bomb. So, but when they arrive in Tokyo, a road has been secured to this small town, and they're told, the officer class is told, we need you to go there and take a look around and report back what you see. And Ferlinghetti was one of the people that went to this town. This was the town of Nagasaki.
Oh,
and
God.
What they saw changed their lives. And I think pretty much all the officers that were with him realized that the world would never be the same again. And these are people who had seen the Dresden bombings. They understood, what war was, but this was very, very different. It's like animate and inanimate objects had almost fused together. And we think now of what's happening in Gaza, and a new kind of warfare and the horror of that. And here we are again. And so it seemed to me like War is a Lie would be a good place, at least maybe to begin.
Thank you, and thank you for that description of Lawrence's stint, which must have been horrifying for him and for everyone who partook. I had no idea, and I don't know. I mean, there must be a biography of him somewhere, and anyway, it's not known to me. You guys know about this, about Ferlinghetti? I had no idea. He didn't make it very public, so.
No, but it inspired him in huge ways. I mean, and it also it really energized him and encouraged him to begin thinking about politics, thinking about alternative politics. He found a book called War is a Racket by Smedley Butler. I don't know how many of you know about Smedley Butler. He was one of the most decorated Marines in World War I, and uncovered, actually, he was approached by a group of American industrialists. This is around the time of Roosevelt. And he was asked to overthrow the U.S. government with the help of thousands of vets. Now, hello, there is this tradition in this country. January 6th was not unprecedented. So, keeping in mind, Lawrence introduced me to the work of Smedley Butler. I had never heard of him. And so that his pacifism really comes from, being deeply informed about this country and its origins and what is beneath the surface.
Thank you for that. Well, I'm also thinking when I wrote this about the wars that we've been sold, like the war in Iraq, even World War II, when you think about it, unless you were a very strong pacifist, you partook as a man. But we've had continuous war, and that's what this kind of speaks to. So war is a lie. War is not an interlude, but a condition, how we tell time. And what would replace the great hysterias of history, the just notions, nations changing their boundaries, tribes shrinking with the heat of the moment. Damage is sold, some shadow entity buys. We transfer our debts from a previous century. Suddenly we're vetted. Did you or didn't you ever hire the undocumented to do your dirty work? Among the statues, they destroy the whole shebang. There's always fresh spoils, tattooed numbers, genetic sorrow. Which mine did you lose? What medal did you gain? And where do you bank? A nation of mercenaries, except in duty-free zones. The quality of intelligence is strained by a plain of hot battlefields. Out of a shattering comes a whole bunch of drones and more threats than ever in the blood of troubles. Here's your weapon. Go ahead. Pry open the past you never expected to hear from again. The code of silence is cracked. Take me in for questioning. I'll talk about what happens in war. Fire, famine, orphans, bones, then forced apologies, evangelisms, and vulgarities where too much has been waiting to happen. There's plenty of that spilling into the air we breathe. One of the lies that I recently heard was that in the Israelis bombing Palestine have used Agent Orange, and they don't admit to it. And we know how awful genetically Agent Orange has been for Vietnam veterans, because it was used extensively there. So that's only one lie. The hunger is a whole nother thing.
And war leads to hunger. And hunger in the streets of San Francisco, hunger in Gaza. There is a piece called Hunger that I'd love if you would read.
Okay. I keep losing your questions. There must be something in that. Tell me again the page.
Yeah, that's page 23.
You know, I thought I was going to reread my own book. It's been so long. It seems like a very long time. This has been postponed to have a 2025 copyright because there are certain review institutions that want 6 months in advance, and it was ready long before that. So I've forgotten about what pages things are on. Excuse me for that. Okay. I don't think I've ever read this aloud. Hunger. Because I made one, I wanted to make another. Then there were two, and I wanted a third. My greed grew daily because there were none for such a long time. I really desired dozens, not content with what was. I knew I was playing with a sharp instrument by wanting a bunch, but Mother always said my eyes were bigger than my stomach. Now that's a great saying. It's as good as the brain is wider than the sky, a saying she couldn't have known. Whereas Father would simply shrug and say we were one drop in a big pool, trying to fill the pool. Everyone knows that one is not going to get you anywhere but out of zero. But the difference between 0 and 1 is nothing versus something. All the difference in the world. Still, I couldn't be sure until there were 2. And at last, after 2, my confidence grew. So bold, I was certain there would come a multitude, swelling up overhead like fighter planes in the sky during an invasion. There is always a war inside and outside. 2 seems too occasional, even if they did come in rapid succession. After I finish with one life, I agree to go into an abyss, and when I emerge, I have another that demands more. Each abyss is deeper, and the submergence beckons the emergence. There is no brightness as bright as the idea of brightness. Now we can use names. Slowly, Persephone realizes this. Slowly, she worms her way up into the light. She wants so much. We want so much from her. We want more than she's able to provide. That every bloom, every bulb bloom, that each branch bud, that every thought generate another. We must provide for ourselves even if she delays her first appearance. Demeter, well, she says Persephone's eyes have always been bigger than her stomach. But Persephone is hard at work all year round, trying to placate her parents with more. Demeter has no idea. She is only an idea. She only made one. I'm sorry to have brought her up. I'm sorry to invoke the gods when I haven't provided you a third, when my hunger is practically immortal, though I am human. What else can I do to keep the hunger alive? What if 3, that ancient charm, never arrives?
Thank you for
It
that.
has a kind of code, I realized reading it, that, I don't have a translation for it because it's one of the pieces in this book that really is a prose poem. So it's not straight prose. There are pieces that are sort of straight, small, clipped, condensed prose, but this isn't one of them. So maybe during quick Q&A, if you want to ask me questions about these kinds of pieces, that'd be great.
And for those of you online, you may use the chat function of your Zoom dashboard to post your questions and comments. I remember back when I started working at City Lights, there was a book down in the history section called Bodyguard of Lies, which was essentially about Hitler's propaganda machine. And there are so many similarities to what we're experiencing right now. And our very sense of reality is being disassembled. And this is actually what fascism actually does. And I was thinking the next piece, I was looking at reality, which is on page 40, as being maybe another possible piece for you to explore.
Yeah, it's interesting because I had not any particular idea of how this was going to be presented, and I tagged certain pieces, and the last two and this one is are three that I tagged. So I don't know why I did, but there you go. Great minds. Although your mind is bigger than the sky too. Okay, reality. We're not at the beginning of the beginning or at the middle of the beginning. We're not at the end of the beginning. We're at the beginning of the middle. It will take some time to reach the middle of the middle. Speaking truth to constituents, we don't know when we'll be at the end of the middle. It will take more time to get to the beginning of the end, perhaps forever. We may not be around for it. I mean, when we reach the middle and the end of the end. So finally, it's a good thing, we believe, to attach people to the new reality. It's Orwell.
Yeah.
More than anything, you know.
Yeah.
It's actually I heard somewhere a snippet of this. We're not at the beginning of the beginning. I couldn't tell you where. I didn't write it down. I don't. I do keep notebooks, but this wasn't in one of them. I don't know what the middle of the middle means, but I think we're farther along than we would like, than we ever imagined, actually. Not to put a dire note, but it is dire. It's our lives. It's not just politics. Don't you just hate it when people say, I'm not a political person? I don't know what to say. I don't know if I can have dinner with you then.
So how do you stand now in relationship to the work now that it's been out for a while? I mean, how do you relate to these pieces? I mean, have you had a chance to go through it?
I haven't done that, but I have to say it hasn't really been out for a while. It's been available for a while under clandestine, undercover. February 1st is what it says. Available February 1st on Asterism Books, which took over a lot of the books that small press distribution used to carry, and this would have been one of them. So it says February 1st. So it's only 2 days old. What do you want from a 2-day-old? It was born yesterday.
And thank goodness for Asterism. I don't know how many of you know about the tragedy of small press distribution. They were a distributor over in Berkeley, and there were hundreds and hundreds of tiny presses that essentially, had no home, and some of which have tanked since SPD went under last year. So that was a great, great tragedy. But Asterism has kind of risen to the occasion. They don't have a lot, but they've picked up a lot of the slack, which is nice. So BlazeVox is one of them.
Yeah. I think you have to approach them. I don't know that, I really don't know enough about them, but I'm so glad there is some organization out there that's willing to do the sort of dirty work of sending out books,
City Lights used to do that, actually. There was a distributor in the basement of City Lights, if you can believe that, back in the late 70s. Actually, Marianne Wallace, who's doing the video tonight, do you remember Subco? Because Subco used to distribute research publications, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And he just in time got out of it and started distributing wine.
Yeah, Yeah, so it was Craig Broadley. Craig Broadley was an employee here at City Lights, and then decided, like, he would take on, like, I think it started with like 8, then went to 12, and I think maybe no more than 20. But research and City Lights and a bunch of other smaller presses, mostly Bay Area small presses, were distributed by Subco for a while, and then we went. When he became a Vinter, we had to go to kind of a larger distributor.
Well, the other day when I was talking to Peter on the phone, I said, "Well, how long have you been at City Lights?" He said, "I just passed my Jesus year." So he has a very good historical reference to many things, obviously, because he has been here for 33 years.
Part of the woodwork.
Everything.
The woodwork. I was hoping maybe, well, it doesn't have to be the final piece, but I was hoping maybe the next piece could be pitch, because it seems to kind of dovetail into some of the other pieces. But, we could read more. I'm enjoying this.
Okay.
I love hearing you read your work.
Great. Pitch actually is the last piece. And something in me said, you can't end this book on this note. You have to have something more exalted. After all, you're a great fan of Whitman. You can't. Whitman pre-Civil War. But I started to notice in other people's books that the last piece somehow wasn't redemptive, but didn't have the same tone as the other pieces, because, as I said before, and I actually should read the last piece last, I think, because it'll make more sense why it's last.
Yeah.
Do you have another one, or should I pick one?
Oh, why don't you pick one of the ones that you had tagged? Yeah.
Well, this one's Jim Brooke, who was once at City Lights and was an editor here and still continues to be my friend and editor and proofreader and confidant about this work, said this was a great satire. And I thought, I want to deal with all kinds of lies, institutional lies, civic lies, personal lies, because humans lie, They lie on a big scale and they lie on a small scale. And all the way to, oh no, officer, I'm so sorry, I just came out. To grander lies. But this sounds very serious, but it's really a lie because I made it up. And there are a lot of pieces in here that refer to fiction as a lie, whereas poetry can't lie. Somehow, broken line poetry especially can't lie. The lines slap you if they don't measure up right. They don't rhyme in the way you want them to. They don't have the rhythm and the beat of music. And so I always think of them as truer. But I've lied throughout this whole book. Why should I stop now? Social work. Is being homeless your business? And if so, are you a U.S. citizen? Why not apply for a license to be poor? To get it, you'll need to complete an application, pass a short test, and donate a quarter or spare change. No one will be denied for lack of funds. Once you pass these simple requirements, you can live and work anywhere, especially outside luxury boutiques, upscale restaurants, startups, and high-tech campuses, of which, much to our municipal surprise, persons such as yourself take little advantage. Live workspaces are in high demand these days. Don't compete with uncertified, toothless thugs. Just extend your legitimate ID, your license to ask, your card to kindly extract small amounts of cash money from those who have more than they need, especially in San Francisco, where the income disparity may be the greatest on earth. If you sign up for the workshop, you'll get tips on the best sites and the best strategies. Geography is destiny, and beggars must be choosy. Here's a sample of our simple but important test questions. There are no wrong answers. Name? Are you a veteran of any war? If so, which one? All? Some? What is your gender? Male? Female? Fluid? I don't remember. Are you housed? Semi-housed? Best place to beg is on the left of a freeway entrance. Best place to beg is on the right of a freeway entrance. Best face to have is a smile, a frown, a scream, any combination of the above. Your signage skills are excellent to superior, fine, legible, attended art school, studied drone striking with the military, calligraphic. Best place to beg is alone on a dark street so that the rare driver who spots you will gladly stop. Best place to beg while circulating at a jazz concert in a public park with others wearing t-shirts that say, "Arise, ye beggars, unionize." Best struggle to support is a $15 an hour minimum begging wage. Best place to beg is by a newspaper kiosk whose owner makes change. Having the appropriate equipment for panhandling is imperative. In this country, no one uses hats anymore to collect change unless you put on an attenuated version of a pocket hamlet in the park. But performing is not begging. Performing for money is payment for services rendered. If you would like a permit for performing for services rendered, please contact our Rendered Services Division. Poverty is a much more complex operation due to cause and effect, and thus trying to ameliorate it requires a special license. Street artists have stood still in Las Ramblas of Barcelona in a variety of poses. Golden Man, Silver Ballerina, Statue of Liberty Woman. Flamenco dancers have performed in the Praça de Rocio of Lisbon. Performers have levitated on the streets of Prague for ages. For centuries in Paris, mimes and puppeteers have performed an important public service that entertains les enfants and les touristes. Begging without offering entertainment in return, however, requires an entirely different and highly coordinated skill. You must create signage. You must accost strangers and passers-by. You must smile. You must also know how to deal with the inevitable pit bull that accompanies the young runaway. All this often in rapid succession. During your training, you will learn how to be a mentor to apprentice beggars. We've developed a specially funded fund, federally funded fund, title 910-111-111-211-435-XYZ11 outreach program for those qualified beggars over 40 to accompany youth beggars. We've developed this will add substantially to your monthly stipend after you acquire your license. We're very excited about this, as several mayors, governors, and presidents for the last 40 years have expressed at one time or another enthusiasm, though during their terms of office were too engaged in foreign wars to participate. However, we have recently received both government and private grants to pursue this program and achieved our nonprofit status. This means that the monthly income you report to us will only be nominally taxed by a small percentage and serve to refund new programs for others such as yourself. We are emphatically committed to persons such as yourselves, legally taking from those who have more than enough to finance those who have not enough. Our recognition program will teach you how to assess such persons. If you want to know who we are, we can assure you who we are not. We are not communists. We are an anonymous group of individuals, some of whom were once Tooth fairies, who provided their children with a weekly allowance, whether or not they cleaned up their rooms or took out the trash. We believe in a guaranteed annual income for those who want to live modestly, as artists in Ireland can. Is Ireland a communist country? No, sir. You could say we are basically neo-retro liberals, and many of us are on neo-paleo diets. Some of us aren't. Meat does not make us more aggressive. And by the way, we do not believe that all men are testosterone driven, though we do know some and have received substantial donations from those whose down their part has largely driven their existence. If you've ever gone hungry to feed your kids, you'll know exactly what we mean. We have long experience visiting developing nations. We have been on cultural missions, brigades, and fact-finding trips. We find international beggars cleverer on the whole than those of the United States. For instance, on our recent excursion to Quetzaltenango, Guatemala, we saw no less than 5 individuals in the streets of this charming city pretending that their legs had been amputated. We saw children under the age of 5 offering chicle on buses from a small dusty box that they fashioned to resemble those of the 1940s. It was similar in beach towns in Mexico, but these children had clearly inherited the chicle boxes their mothers had before them. Begging can be a family business in countries where poverty is inherited. Our NGO has studied Roma worldwide, whose menacing facade and deeply dark eyes promise to hijack wallets from back pockets rather than simply ask for coinage. There's safety in numbers and camaraderie we've only seen in tent cities or refugee camps. We have always been particularly enamored of small, slender boys who board local buses to make the rounds of captive audiences. Some sing in high-pitched voices, prepubescent and innocent. We scoop them up and teach them how to recognize tourists because there is no use in asking for money from your own. Education is key. A campesino with 2 chickens stashed in the overhead department is unlikely to have any spare cash. We give these boys an education that includes instruction in the foreign languages of their choice, plus benefits. Of course, they're nothing like the street children of Europe who work the crowds with sophisticated psychology. A mixture of guilt and sadness with a dash of amusement arises in individuals. And guilt is precisely what the poor must keep playing on. If you fought a war and haven't yet obtained proper medical treatment, you're entitled to veterans benefits. You're poor and you're going to stay that way, so we urge you to get licensed to be poor. If you work at a wage job, you're poor, unless a rich aunt who you didn't know you had dies and leaves you her paid-off house. You'll stay poor. You know how to work, so work it. If you just got evicted with your 4 children and your grandfather is in prison and your mother is dating a guy who's in prison and you don't have a high school diploma, what will you do? No, you need cash. Your once beautiful body can't save you now. You need to get out on the streets and equalize the economy. Your poverty needs to be legitimized. You need to be a card-carrying poor person. There's so many people in this country. You're one of them. You're not a religious mendicant. You'll never visit India, but you can imagine the number of successful orphans there, can't you? Many of them are blind and crippled. You aren't. If you were, you would be taken care of by the state. With a license to be poor, you'll beg better and earn more. Hurry up and get one today.
There was a one-armed heavy metal guitarist who used to perform in Kerouac Alley. This is before the pandemic. And he used to put a little hat out in front of him, and he had this sling. So somehow he managed to just move one of his hands up along the fretboard. So there was a guy working the corner, and he got really upset. And was coming out of Vesuvio's one time, and the panhandler goes right up into the face of the heavy metal guitarist And he's just like going like this, and the heavy metal guitarist stops and he goes, "You're cramping my style. You've got to go." And he turns and walks away, and then the heavy metal guitarist like starts back up again. And I'm about to walk into the store, and the panhandler walks up to me and goes like, "Do you want me to do something about this?" I'm like, "No, it's okay. Give him a chance." He's like, "No, man." He's like, "This is my corner." I was like, "Okay, well, that's what you think. Good luck."
You can only have that if you live in a small place. You can have your corner. Actually, there are people in Berkeley, especially people who beg outside of Chez Panisse, which always tickles me somehow because it's an expensive restaurant. They stand at the very bottom of the stairs. So when people come down the stairs after feasting, they're right there in their face. They don't even have to say anything, right? So that's their spot. But we used to have all kinds of different characters who had spots. I don't know what happened to them, but yeah.
Well, before we go into the Q&A, do you want to read pitch for us?
I'll read pitch because you want me to.
I do.
Okay, so this has a little bit of sentimentality to it, but you can forgive me after dealing with all this horror. It's pitch, and it's after Whitman. So some of the lines are just really straight out of Whitman, but words have been replaced. We can no longer gradually head for the territories in search of freedom. You air that serves me with breath to speak, we can't breathe. There goes an old man in a red suit on a dirt bike with red tires. Shall we too bop around the country, making light of government policy, running down miles of scroll as we type and type? Aloof and lighthearted, we could take to the open road. We can't hear America singing anymore. So we'd be jazz riffed. We'd be goofing at the table. We'd be a one-of-a-kind duo. There are days that must happen to us. These are the days that must happen to us. We could drop messages instead of acid. We could rescue Gen Z from its lack of irony. The great public poets of the century would be writing poems simultaneously. They are larger, better than I thought. I did not know they held so much goodness. We would hesitate before the ghastly, the overripe, the waste, the lies and more lies. They are the greatest women, but how selfish we'd be called. Only children might understand. At night we may tell ourselves wordless stories and sing until all the Nazis die. Roaming the countryside in search of just having the roam. Terrified of the dark, going through it. Stopping there and there to spend a day taking note. In the end, we'd give America a giant report card that goes viral. If it's so divided, it will need more than two parties to tango through. We'd show you YouTube clips of Greta Thunberg chatting in the Situation Room with farmers from the Dakotas on every disaster caused by man. But America lives to make war, say the sad generals. That road is over. We'd explain how little time there is, how dangerous the moment. We would send bulletins from the urgent edges. Eternity exists, but not for us. Thank you.
as we're waiting for people's little gray cells to produce some comments and some questions, I'll ask, at the risk of sounding a little bit gauche, and please forgive me for this, what are the conditions under which you write?
What do you mean?
Well, because
Physical,
different
mental?
people, different people write in different ways. I mean, sometimes they'll write in the morning. Some people like to write late at night. Some folks like they'll be on BART. They'll prefer to just sort of scribble and with urgency before they arrive somewhere. But if they were to sit down at a table, I know writers who can't sit at a table. They can't write at a table. They have to be somewhere else to be able to write. So I'm just very curious how these pieces in particular emerged and what the conditions of their emergence was.
Well, not to be too literal about it, but I could say all of the above except for night. I don't usually write anything but overheard conversation at night. And if I've been somewhere that is particularly juicy and somehow pertains to the book I'm working on, I have journals for those kinds of lines that I pick up. But I don't need much, I mean, I have more than I need. Just having a computer is an amazing thing, even though it's to blame for so much. We won't go there again. But having a desk, having a space, having quiet now without children and husbands and people running around, being old, really old compared to most of you, makes it somewhat easier. Although it makes it difficult to get started on a new project for me, because there used to be immense amount of excitement, and now there's like raw necessity. If I need to do this, which some people experience when they're young. I need to sit down and write. But no, I'm not the kind of writer who has regular habits. I used to tell my students, I used to lie to my students. I used to say, you should have a writing practice, and you should try to figure out how long that practice would be, so that every time you sat down to write, you'd know that's what you had to do. But that's only good for fiction writers. That's not good for people who think poetically. It doesn't work. And so it only works for fiction, actually. And I've certainly written some fiction, some short stories, where I forced myself to sit down on a regular basis. But does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. So we'd love to open it up now for Q&A. Are there any questions online?
Well, there's a comment.
A comment. Let's. I'll let you.
Okay.
Is it good?
Julie, someone I know, I think, named Julie, she just said, we could rescue Gen Z from their lack of irony, LOL.
Oh, I know who it is. It's Julie Patton, the poet, in New York. No, not in New York. Where are you, Julie? Anyway, she, I think, she doesn't live in New York anymore, but somewhere in the Midwest. She does good work.
Anybody in here?
Oh, you have to have questions.
Oh, good. Let me come to you with the mic, because the people online will not be able to hear you if I don't bring it to you.
Hi, Gloria.
Hi, Marina.
I want you to talk about the prose poem, which is my favorite form of yours, although I love all your work. And you mentioned how poetry tells the truth and fiction, there can be lies. Where does the prose poem fall in there? And then I just want to ask you about if poetry tells the truth, Dickinson's comment of tell the truth, but tell it with a slant. So that's maybe a two-part question.
It's a good one. It's really good. And I think maybe the prose poem is right in there with that slant. I think it's poetry. And Baudelaire insisted, toujours, toujours, poète, même en prose. So you're always a poet. And the same thing goes when you're writing prose. It's a sensibility, which some fiction writers actually have. I used to make lists of fiction writers who had a poetic sensibility, and counter lists, like André Breton would make lists of lisez, ne lisez pas. Philip Roth is not very poetic. I'm reading, almost finished reading a novel I don't really like very much. It's called The Nickel Boys. They just made a movie out of it. I'm sure it's going to be a fabulous movie because it's one episode after another. It's not poetic in any possible way. So the writer doesn't have that sensibility. It's not good or bad. It just is. So let's see. What the rest of your question about the lying?
Well, I was just wanting you to talk mainly about where prose poetry falls. The prose poem, you were explaining how poetry always tells the truth, and that Dickinson line of "but tell it slant, tell it with a slant."
Right.
So I think I find it interesting. You said the prose poem might be the slant, but I just wanted you to talk about that in terms of, well, if fiction can lie and poetry tells the truth, to kind of talk more about the use of the prose poem, especially in something like you've written, which has different genres going on, really. But I don't know. That was kind of my comment, and I wanted to hear what you could talk about the prose poem and why you choose that for something like this.
Well, that's not fair. I taught a whole course in it. I don't think that the prose poem is anything but poetry. I mean, if you ask contemporary poets, they don't quite think, I'm just thinking about language poets, they don't think of their using the sentence as fiction in any way or prose. It's just the sentence and the paragraph. And that influenced me when I was younger, and influenced me a lot, that I felt permission to be able to use the formal conventions of prose in, use my sensibility. So don't you know when something is poetry? Does it take the top of your head off? It's different. It doesn't matter how it looks on the page. It could be spread out all over the page, right, and still be a prose poem. But unfortunately, all of these are marketing devices to categorize. This is a hard book to categorize. Originally, the first publisher I sent it to was City Lights. And Elaine said, she loved it, but she didn't know how she could publish it. In other words, how is she going to market this? I was extremely disappointed because I thought it fit perfectly politically. But that's what I have to say about the difference. Yeah.
You mentioned Philip Roth as not having a poetic sensibility. So could you say who you think as a fiction writer or a writer does?
Well, I have two in mind, and you probably won't know who they are, and I don't mean to be obscure, but I've been reading them for a while now. Olga Tokarczuk, who was a Nobel Prize winning author, who is Polish and whose work really fits into a poetic sensibility, but she writes prose. She writes, narratives. So she's one who comes to mind. And I've been reading, I have to reread some of her work. She's also kind of been picked off as really one of the great contemporary European women writers. And why am I forgetting her name? I'll remember it in 1 second. Jenny Erpenbeck. Does she sound familiar? No. I highly recommend her, anything that she's written. She's not always brilliant, but she's pretty close to it. You have to forego expectations of a regular story because, like her last book, she told a story and then she went back and gave different endings to the characters' destinies. So it's like she was telling different stories at the same time, but different possible outcomes. So she's very imaginative in terms of her prose. I wish I could cite more. I could certainly dig out my brain archive if I weren't doing this right now. Yeah, you're welcome. Sorry to be obscure in my,
Anyone else? Do we have anything online at all?
No, there was just the only other earlier comment.
Yeah.
A sort of a wow about Lawrence.
Yeah.
In his situation.
Okay. Well, here we go.
In what you read, I saw you kind of edging up to this, but there's lies and more lies. Say something about the normalization of lies.
Yeah, well, one obvious one is that we did a lot of protesting, most of us who are around the same age or slightly younger. We did a lot of protesting of wars, and here they are, one after another. They don't seem to end, and it seems to me that the reasons for them are false, and that the falsehoods generate more falsehoods about them, such as the one I cited about napalm, and the fact that any war could be any other war where you're killing people and starving them and torturing them and doing all that war does. You don't need, and not telling the truth about what you're doing. I'm thinking of Abu Ghraib. I'm thinking about all that's gone on in the Middle East recently, but it seems like a lot of our wars have located there, but Russia has, decimated the Ukraine, and if the Ukraine doesn't get more aid from the United States, it may lose the war. In fact, it's losing right as we speak. But why? And why is aid not forthcoming, So I'm sorry, ask your question again, because I want to make sure I've answered it.
Well, what made me think of it was the piece on your panhandling license, and how anybody that in this country that's probably under 40 years of age, homelessness is normal,
Right.
because it's seen every day and it's always been there, and but in the richest country in human history, it's a lie. So that's
I'm
kind of
so
what
glad you asked that question, because I think of like homelessness, war, and famine I think of them all, I put them all in the same category. And, you know, if the United States, for instance, and there's homelessness in other countries, but if the US wanted to end homelessness, I mean, this sounds really simplistic, but it's true. It could enlist the Army Corps of Engineers to build housing, and in 1 month, a city could have housing for the homeless. It's not so complicated, you know? I mean, I remember when my kid was little, and I said, don't get so close to that person. They're homeless. 'Cause a lot of homeless people have TB. And the answer was, you know, why are they homeless? And I said, because they don't have any place to live. And she says, well, just build them houses. You know? I mean, why is it so complicated unless somebody wants a lower class in misery? And maybe it's a naive answer. I mean, I'm sure I'm being very idealistic about my answer, but I don't think it's that hard to home people, especially when there's only in a city. How many homeless people do we have in San Francisco? 7,500. That's peanuts. You know, compared to the kind of housing they're building in Berkeley for students, you know, every day something is going down and something is going up. It just depends on what class you are, right? So I hope that answers. Yeah. Andrew.
Here, let me come to you because people online are not going to be able to hear you. There you go. Thank you.
I like the homeless poem, but I had two contradictory thoughts. The first thought was, well, it's satire, and we need some sharp satire in this day and age. It's one thing we really need, I think, given people's inability to think about what's going on politically. But I had the opposite thought, too, which was that maybe a homeless license is a good idea.
I know.
Because the homeless are a population that's pushed out of normal society and tabooed and have all kinds of symbolic loads placed upon them.
Right.
And if you give them a license, you kind of normalize it a bit, you know, and you can use it to bring them within the framework of general society.
Of course, that idea has a counter argument. There were a spate of artists in the 80s and 90s who started attending, making their art about homelessness. And there was one artist whose name was Meryl, I can't remember her last name, because I don't know her other work. She's kind of a performance artist, and she was making better shopping carts for homeless people. So making life a little easier for them. And my response to that had always been making it easier to be homeless. I don't know why, but it offended me. Like, I don't really think that homeless people should have licenses to be homeless. Not after driving under the freeway under the West Oakland BART with some friends as a kind of shortcut, or if we got lost, I can't remember what, but the huge, huge village of homeless people in, as they call them in England, caravans, you know, RVs and trailers and all kinds of vehicles. And you could see lights in the back as you drove through that were candles, you know. I mean, unless they had, you know, bitten into the electrical circuits, I don't know. But I was absolutely shocked. I told my photographer friend Ruth Morgan, we've got to go out there and talk to these people and you know, capture what's going on. And it came to naught. We have another project that we're doing with immigrants, but yeah, I don't think legitimizing something ugly and normalizing something ugly and hideous and against all good human sense.
Well, the best is the enemy of the good.
What?
The best is the enemy of the good. That is, you can make life better if you can make life better from the homeless people, maybe you should. For example, being in a RV is better than being on the street.
It is. I mean, it depends. You know,
Having a tent
I
is
understand
better
your argument. I just don't.
You don't agree.
I don't agree. That's all. Yeah. That does not make life substantially better. It's still precarious because you're asked to move, and if you don't move, then your stuff is destroyed. So life is very tentative. Home is home is where you go at night to sleep. Very tentative. So how good is that if it's going to be torn down, or you're going to be asked to move, or your stuff is going to be burned? Anyway.
Automobiles are expensive to maintain as well.
I don't think they move, many of them, anymore.
Maintaining a vehicle is expensive, especially when you have no money.
Right, right.
Well, we do find ourselves at the top of the hour,
Are we at the top of the hour?
and
Okay.
I want to thank you and congratulations for this lovely book.
Oh, you're
And
so welcome.
thank you all for joining us here in the Poetry Room. Thank you for joining us online.
Thank you for coming out in the rain. And this, you know, it's kind of not raining a lot, but it's still kind of unpleasant. And thank you for those of you who, you know, took part like some of us did and tried to find parking, some of you. So thank you a lot for coming.